Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Islam in Life with me, Raza Kazim. There is not a moving, living creature on earth, nor a bird that flies with its two wings, but are communities like you. We have neglected nothing in the book. Then unto their Lord they all shall be gathered. Says Allah in the Holy Quran. What does this verse mean? What message are we to receive from pondering over this?
There is not a moving creature on earth, nor a bird that flies with its two wings, but are communities like you. We have neglected nothing in the book. Then unto their Lord they all shall be gathered. Over 200 verses in the Quran deal with animals to teach us some lessons. The detail in which these animal stories are mentioned in the Holy Book are absolutely fascinating too. The animals have orders, rules and regulations. They live as a community or a nation and even have their own languages. Their level of organization is astounding, and it is therefore of no surprise why Allah has intended us to learn from the examples of these animals. The Quran also strongly enjoins Muslims to treat animals with compassion and not to abuse them. Animal rights and welfare are clearly incorporated in the Holy Quran.
We're honored to be joined by our esteemed guest, Professor Tariq Ramadan, to discuss all of these issues. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam. I want to ask, why are animals mentioned in the Quran so frequently, as was said in the clip?
I think that we can understand the meaning of this presence of animals in the Quran when we come to the Islamic cosmology, the very understanding of the creation. Because what we understand is that the meaning of everything in Islam is Tawheed, La ilaha illallah. There is no God, no deity but God. Muhammadun Rasulullah, and Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the last messenger. When this is understood, what we need to understand is the acknowledgement that there is one God and that He created everything, is for us to understand that around us there are lots of signs and there is a new way of looking at the creation. So not only we pray, but nature is praying and praising. سَبَّحَ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Everything on earth, in the heavens and on earth is praising God. So the trees, so the stars, everything is praising. And within this, animals have a very specific role. Why? Because they are praising God in a very natural way. In fact, through the way they live and in a natural way, this is the way they pray. So what we do out of consciousness when we pray 5 times a day, they do it permanently with their instincts. So there are signs for us. We have a lot to learn, and we have a lot to respect, and we have a lot to understand with the presence of animals in the Quran and in this cosmology, which is the way, by looking at animals, we come and meditate on their presence, we come closer to the Creator.
We're going to come back to some of those points that you mentioned. There are also surahs in the Quran, chapters in the Quran, like for example Surah Fil, which is named after an animal, the elephant. What is the significance of that particular surah, perhaps? Why does that happen?
In fact, the titles that we have for the chapters in the Quran are disputed among scholars, because it's not always clear why. But in the one that you were mentioning, there is a story with the fil and before the Prophet, peace be upon him. So the story is connected to the title. This is clear within the surah. In some other surah, it's also connected. You have 1, 2, or 3 verses or a story, and you will find that within the story there is the animal that we are talking about when it comes to the cow, for example, in the Quran, the 2nd chapter of the Quran. So there is a discussion in Egypt about, sacrificing a cow. So it's referred to this. So some are saying yes, it's clearly this. Others are saying no, it's wider than this. It's because this is the longest surah in the Quran. So it's disputed but there is always one verse or one reference to something that can explain why the chapter is named after one specific animal.
And in terms of the what you talked about, you mentioned earlier about learning something from the animals. Is there something that we can learn from the stories that are given in the Quran, and what are those things that we as human beings learn?
Yes, in the verse that you quoted at the beginning, there is one first essential dimension, is that all the creatures are created within a community, so they have a community. And meaning they have a community, these are individuals within a collectivity or community. And there are rules and organizations. So the first is, this is Sunnatullah. This is the way God created nature, that every living species has to deal with a community, and you have to look at it. Now, this is the first step, just to get a sense that what we are as a humanity, as a community of human beings, brothers and sisters in humanity, it's exactly the same everywhere. So this is why we also say, Rabbul Alameen, the Lord of the worlds. And the worlds are the visible and the invisible. And among the visible, these are worlds, universes that are organized. This is one, that we have to take this as something which is mirroring our own reality. And now, when you look at the animals, they are doing things in a natural way that are amazing. So, for example, in the organizations that you have within a specific community, there are rules that you can just get to say, there is an order. So what we need to get out of our struggle to be organized, for example, for us, أَمْرُهُمْ شُورَ بَيْنَهُمْ. So we are using our language to set consultation. What you see with animals is that they have instincts, and they have an unknown language among themselves that is helping them to organize themselves. So the order that we find there is the order that should be one of our objectives. So instincts sometimes with animals are more powerful than our mind with human beings, and sometimes it's important for our mind to study instincts to understand what we should do with our intelligence in order to have or to set orders and organizations and hierarchy within our systems, which is there with the animals.
We learn from the animals, or we could learn from the animals. Yeah. We are supposed to be, according to the classification, the most superior in terms of the creatures created and so on. How does that marry with us learning from the animals?
Yeah, that's a good point, because at the end is the definition of superiority. What do we mean by this? When it is said in the Quran, سَخَّرَ لَكُم مَا فِي السَّمَوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, Allah gave and put at your all what is created at your disposal. So, and we are vicegerent. We have the guardianship of the thing. This is إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. We are vicegerent on earth. So it's, and we also have this dignity. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. There is a natural dignity, an essential dignity for all human beings, not only Muslims but everybody. And then we also have to learn from people who are within the hierarchy of creation, who are apparently lower than us. Why? Because in fact our dignity is to serve, not to abuse. And how do we serve? By learning. So when we understand that our dignity as human beings is to serve the one, and to serve humanity, and to serve the creation, and to respect creation, this is why we have to learn. So our superiority is not arrogance. Our superiority is to serve, is to know the right way to serve the creation, and to serve and to protect the creation, because what we should understand is that the owner of everything is telling us, manage this world in a way which is respecting my order, and among the elements of my order, animals and the way they are organized. So you better learn from them in order to serve me.
We use animals. We don't serve animals, or we might serve animals for food on the table, but we don't, the way that you're suggesting serving them, we're not doing that. So we might eat certain animals, we might ride on certain animals. So how does that link up? Because that's not what we're doing, you know, that's not what actually goes on.
Yes and no. When we, for example, are respecting the life of the animals, which is, in the clip it was said, this is essential. It is said in the hadith, in the prophetic tradition, that a woman is going to be saved because she protected a cat, and another one is going to be punished because she mistreated a cat. So this is something which is essential. We are serving them by the way we are treating them. Now there is another category, and the other category is that what we are going to eat. And we are serving God, and this is the way we are dealing with it. If only we, for example, slaughter animals, or we kill animals in order to survive and to eat them, but to kill them for other reasons, this is not acceptable in Islam. There should be a clear objective why we are doing this. And by the way, I would say that the Muslims are so obsessed by the way we slaughter that they don't take into account what we are talking about, respecting the animals, respecting the creation through the way we are dealing with animals when they are alive. We have to take this very seriously. So what we do here, and what should be said to make this possible for us to eat is Bismillah. I begin with God. In the name of God, I'm doing this, and I'm sacrificing the animal to be able to eat and to survive. So that's the only way it is possible. So there are different categories and different ways of dealing with this issue. But in every situation, no matter what, if you eat, if you serve, if you use the animal, you should treat them the right way, you should respect them, and there is no suffering. That's not disputable.
Lots of interesting points. We do like to keep this show as interactive as possible and really value your opinion. Here is what you sent us this week.
This week we asked, what lessons do we learn from animals mentioned in the Quran? Masood from Jordan said, we often think of ourselves as being too superior and disregard other animals, but Allah uses their positive example, such as their united working pattern, to teach us basic but very important aspects of life. Sharifa from Bangladesh said, the Holy Quran talks a lot about the bee and emphasized how organized and communal the bees are, because of which they are able to achieve amazing success. He then tells us to be like the bee, as we are also social animals and need communities to thrive. And Rayof from the UK said, there's a whole chapter in the Quran named after the cow. This is because the Jews back then used to worship the cow, and we learn lesson about oneness of Allah through this chapter.
In terms of the lessons from the animals you see, Surah Baqarah talks about, which is in relation to Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, Moses, about how Bani Israel used a cow to start worshipping the cow. It's lessons of Tawheed, about the oneness of Allah from Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. The bee, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about how such a small creation can create something which is now benefiting humans in today's time, which is the honey. Allah talks about how the bee produces honey from the plants, and how it comes into production. He talks about the production system, the manufacturing system of how honey is produced. And when honey is produced, what did Allah say? He talks about that it's got shifa in it, it's a healing. So Allah, through the bees, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we've gained shifa. And if you see in today's time, scientists have explained of what the benefits of honey are, the natural remedies that people use.
That's all the comments we have for this week. If you'd like to have your views featured in the show, be sure to follow us on Facebook or join us on Twitter. Now you can send your own videos with your comments and even your questions to islamandlife@presstv.com.
You mentioned very early on about Surah Baqarah being called because it was related, and again in the clip we heard there, the connection being made to Bani Israel worshipping the cow and so on. But the Surah Baqarah is a very, very long surah, very long chapter, and it has many different themes within it. So why is the name of the chapter been called Baqarah, the cow, as opposed to something else? Is there any significance in that, or is this random?
No, you can find significance and something that could be essential. And one of the commentators in the clip and the young person that was responding was saying that it's connected. The whole story about the cow has to do with worship, and at the end was to understand that we can worship only one God. So it's coming back to the Tawheed as being central. So by worshipping the cow, what they were doing is just forgetting the very essence. And it's the distortion of when you start your life and missing the points, which is instead of worshipping one God, you end up worshipping wealth, worshipping elements in this. So the cow is a symbol of something which is the deep understanding of Tawheed. So
is that, sorry to interrupt, but is that a kind of negative connotation that this chapter has been named with that, to remind people not to do that, as opposed to do something that is positive, that is Tawheed?
Yes. On that issue, yes, because here is respecting the cow as an animal. It's not to worship it, to worship the cow as a symbol of what we can, the idols. So this is something which is very important, is the difference between respecting and worshipping. In the name of God, we respect everything, but we worship only Him. In the name of polytheism, we end up worshipping elements that in fact are just but means. So there is here respecting nature but not worshipping nature. And this could be also the problem that we might have with some who are saying you cannot kill any animal, you cannot eat them, the vegetarianism and all this, that we can understand. They are right in one way, we have to respect life. But to the point that you can't deal with animals' life in order to survive or to eat, this might be a disagreement that we have.
And in terms of the way that animals are portrayed in the Quran, are they always portrayed in a positive light, or are there other instances, or how are they portrayed?
Mainly when it comes to the situation is just for us to look at the way they are created, to get some teachings and lessons that we can draw from that. There is one instance, for example, where it's a أُولَٰئِكَ كَالْأَنْعَامِ بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ. They are like animals, they are even in a darker situation, meaning that in fact here there is one thing, which is to respect the instincts, but they are dealing like animals with no reason, with no wisdom. Because the difference of status is, in the name or through our wisdom as believers, we should respect the animals, and we should respect their instincts in the way they are organizing themselves. But we should also acknowledge that the animals are animals, and there is no intellectual abstraction possible, and this is why we have a different status. So in this occurrence it's negative if with your mind you end up acting or behaving like an animal with no mind. This is why it's negative. But as creatures, as being part of this cosmology that I was talking about, it's always positive, because this is part of the gift, because the creation, the species are a gift given to humanity and given to human beings to deal with.
Within Muslim communities, what we often, I suppose, it's marked by its absence in terms of conversations that we're having within the community. Animals are not discussed. There'll be political issues being discussed, fiqh issues being discussed, but animals aren't part of that common parlance, common thing.
You're right, but I think there are more and more, at least in the West. Western Muslims are talking more and more about this. In fact, in the tradition, in the very old tradition, you can just go in the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th centuries. You have scholars who are talking about this, about the fact that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was very respectful towards cats, for example, and he was loving cats, and even the way he was dealing with them was very special, and he was dealing the same with camels and all this. So there is in our tradition, coming from the surah, the biography of the Prophet, peace be upon him, something which is very deep in this. Today, in Muslim majority countries, as if we don't really care, and you have some people saying, "Oh, you know what? We have enough problems with human beings. We are not going to add to this the problems that we may have with animals." And in fact, the problem is not that we have problems with human beings, but it's in fact the reasons behind are exactly the same. In fact, we end up having this problem with animals because our ethical standard, our ethical reference is missing in everything. So we can just end up talking about halal and haram rules, and this is possible and this is not. But it's all about behavior. And Islam is all about behavior. And the behavior is also that we have to deal with animals. So we are becoming very technical in the way we deal with things, and especially we don't talk enough about animals. And now in the West we have some sisters and some brothers who are coming to a deeper understanding of how do we nurture the animal, the environment, how we treat them, how we eat them, how sometimes we have to eat less meat. Just as a principle, when you look at the world the way it is, it's not only important to know how it was slaughtered, but to have a balanced way of life. This is something that is coming now. It's out of our experience, I think. It's coming more and more, and this is very positive.
In the West, and you talked about the fact that animal rights are more, and that therefore Muslims are talking about them more. But within the Western context, have the rights of animals, has the pendulum swung too far the other way, where there is perhaps a greater emphasis and importance given to that than perhaps there should be?
I don't think so. I think that, of course, that's Hamas very obsessed with this, and to the point that they wouldn't accept anything that has to do with eating, or putting the rights of animals beyond everything, to the point that you ask yourself, are they putting more rights or respecting more the animals' rights than the human beings? And in the way they deal with other countries, for example, it's more important to protect their animals than to protect human beings elsewhere.
Sorry to interrupt, but one of the things that came to my mind is that sometimes you have people who are extremely well off, leaving their entire estate and millions of pounds to some animals and looking after animals' charities, and that proportionate.
Yes, that you are right. But I would say that this happens, but I would say that these are exceptions. I wouldn't say that we cannot reduce the West to this. So these exceptions, we can be critical towards them. But I would say that overall, in what we have in the way the animals are nurtured, the industrialization and the industrialized process that we have now, it's just unacceptable, the way we treat animals. And even in the West, we are not aware, and we are silent about this. So it's not enough. I would say the opposite. So we have some excessive ways of dealing with this, but there is a common way which is not dealing with it the right way. And I would say, in fact, that if we, as Western Muslims, we would be, and we should be, an added value in the West, is by bringing issues like this, which are common issues that we can come with people of other faith or people with no faith, and they have principles, and we have to come together. This is the added value. Say, look, how are you going to come back to God while we don't respect the creation, we don't respect living beings? Because this is also an essential part of our spiritual path.
And you mentioned industrialization and the fact that they're not being treated well. In terms of when we are producing them to be eaten, there is an issue around that in terms of how that's being done. And is it Islamically okay? There are questions around that need to be answered, surely.
If you want, my answer is not Islamically okay. But some scholars would say yes, because it's a state of necessity. Haja, we can do this. I think it's wrong. I think we can't have this. You know, when the industrialized pressure is there to the point that we are not respecting beings and living beings, I think that there is something wrong in our priorities. So I would prefer to start with protecting the animals and question the industrialized way of living instead of doing the opposite. And I think it's not Islamic.
Thank you for that. The mention of animals throughout the Quran suggests the due degree of importance being given to animals. While our status as human beings is classified as higher than that of animals, in fact there are some qualities described about the animals that perhaps we as human beings could learn from. This is a topic that is often not in the common parlance of our Muslim communities, and perhaps this program brings some needed attention to that. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I would like to thank Professor Tariq Ramadan for joining us, and I thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.